We're awaiting one additional member to come before we start the hearing.
All right, we can declare a quorum.
You've been waiting for me? Yes. The whole world waits for you.
Good afternoon, everyone. The meeting of the Assembly Budget Subcommittee number 4 on State Administration is hereby open. I will ask the committee secretary to take roll and establish a quorum.
Arambula.
Here.
Chesbro. Here. Cook. De La Torre. Jeffries.
Here.
Very well. We'll turn our attention to the consent calendar. Are there any items that members wish to pull or to for discussion or a separate vote?
Pulling 3.
So pulled. This is issue 3 on Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Yeah.
That was more of a question than it was a statement.
Yes.
Any additional items? On issue number 2 under the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, I will not pull it, but I would like to request some information on that item to be submitted in writing to the committee, specifically addressing how the department will achieve the $100 million goal that was set for, I believe it was unallocated reductions. So with that, and with issue number 3 under Department of Corrections being pulled, is there a motion for approval of the remaining consent agenda items? There's a motion. Is there a second? The chair will second for discussion. Very well. I will ask the committee secretary to call the roll.
Arambula.
Aye.
Chesbro. Cook.
Aye.
De La Torre. Jeffries.
Okay. Turning to issue number 3 under the consent agenda, is it, Mr. Jeffries, your desire to hear this item today or to pull it entirely from the agenda?
Let me ask my vice chair.
Okay. Okay. Then I believe I received some communication from Member De La Torre's office that he also wished to have this item pulled. So why don't we hold it over until he arrives, if that's all right. With that, then we'll turn to the items to be heard. The first item is under the Department of Justice, issue 1, the Legal Services Fund Swap. I believe the Department of Justice, the LEO, and Finance departments will be available to present, and then afterwards we'll have a panel discussion with several individuals. I've been informed that their names are Sarah Wan, Peter Douglas, and Paul Thayer, who will be testifying afterwards, and then we'll have anyone in the audience who wishes to comment will have an opportunity to do so. So with that, let's turn to issue number 1. And as I understand, the governor's 2010-2011 budget made some proposals in this regard, so I'll turn to the Department of Finance for a summary of the proposal.
Teresa Calvert with the Department of Finance. The governor's budget includes a shift of general fund support for legal services from the Attorney General's office to a control section that would be then allocated to departments for use for paying for DOJ legal services. Currently, those funds are within DOJ, who then uses them for their general fund client departments. We're proposing this new allocation method as a way to encourage better use of the limited resources that are available for legal services, and also as a better tracking tool for finding out what these dollars are used for.
And LAO, your analysis?
Drew Soderborg, Legislative Analyst's Office. The governor's proposal has merit because it would provide agencies a way to use less expensive DOJ legal services in years where the state's aggregate budget for legal services proves insufficient for the amount needed. And also by requiring DOF to approve requests for legal services, it would help ensure that agencies do not make excessive use of DOJ legal services. And it may prompt agencies to use in-house legal services or to settle cases earlier where that's more cost effective. In addition, by eventually moving the funding to individual agency budgets, the proposal may indeed prompt agencies to use this funding a little more effectively. However, because we feel that there is insufficient legislative oversight of the process, we recommend, one, requiring that requests above $1 million proceed no sooner than 30 days following notification to the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. And two, we also recommend the use of the control section only during 2010-11 and making the ongoing adjustments to agencies' budgets beginning in 2011-12. Moreover, we feel that the proposal needs a technical fix because it does not technically appropriate money for legal services anywhere in the budget. Accordingly, we recommend that the legislature appropriate the funding in an item in the budget.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I have, if I may have questions for finance and for the analyst. First of all, why, and maybe it's because I'm not seeing the entire budget, legal Department of Justice's budget in front of me, but am I correct in assuming that the four commissions, the Coastal Commission, State Lands Commission, BCDC, and the Delta Protection Commission have been selectively targeted for this, or is this part of a larger effort throughout state government?
This is a larger effort. There is no selection of individual general fund departments. It is all general fund client departments that the DOJ now serves that would be affected by this. It is not specific to resources area departments.
So let me ask both generally and specifically, was any consideration given to looking at whether an individual commission or agency or department had a history of living within their budget, their legal budgets, or whether they had any history of, I mean, is this in response to somehow agencies not being able to function with the budgets they've been given, the legal budgets?
No, it's in response to a very limited amount of general fund resources being available for these legal services for all the general fund clients. There are some departments that perhaps better manage some of their legal workload, but there was no thought of excluding some and keeping some in the shift. There would be uniformity problems. There'd be administrative issues, I think, for the Department of Justice. So there wasn't thought of excluding those that may have had
well, clearly, in the case of these four commissions, there is no history that I am aware of, although I'm open to being informed here, of them spending more than was allocated to them for their legal budgets.
Mr. Chairman, Dave Parker on behalf of the Attorney General. Just a brief bit of background here. We're here primarily because of the reductions to the Attorney General's budget over the last 18 months. And in those reductions, our legal divisions have lost about $30 million, all fund sources, $16 million of the general fund. And accompanying that general fund reduction, that total reduction, we've lost about 130 attorney positions we've abolished because the money was vetoed from our budget. So when we look back on what occurred over the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, we're at a point in time now where we simply don't have the resources today that we had 12 months ago. So we're in a position now, as the consultant's write-up in your agenda indicates, there's about a $30 million operating deficit in our legal divisions, primarily from our general fund clients, and we need to find a way to resolve this issue. We had essentially two choices. We could come to you and ask you for $30 million of general fund. We didn't think that was likely to occur. The other option is that we could look for a way to do business a little bit better, a little bit more proactive and a little bit more efficient to try and find ways to work with our general fund clients to reduce the need for our services. What we found is that our general fund clients and our special fund clients are treated differently with respect to how they pay for their legal services. So if you're a special fund client, DMV, for instance, special fund supports their department. We bill them for our services on an hourly basis. If you're a general fund client, traditionally we've had general fund in our budget to do that work over time. But like I said, all that work we've done in the past, all that resource is gone now. So when the governor vetoed the money from our budget last February, we essentially went through a process and zero-based our entire departmental budget. And what we know is starting on July 1st, we don't have the same number of bodies that we had prior to July 1st to do what appears to be the same level of work. So unless you can provide us with additional general fund resources so we can hire additional attorneys, we've got to come up with some alternative solution.
The Coastal Commission, BCDC, the Lands Commission, and the Delta Protection Commission all are the primary protectors of not only our coastline but our aquatic resources. If it happens in this coming budget year or in future budget years, if this we're allowed to continue, and the legal fund runs out, what is the recourse for that commission to continue to provide their responsibility to the people to defend the law and defend the coastline and the bay and the delta and state lands?
There's a couple of issues there. I think the first one is how do we address this $30 million gap in the short term?
Well, you've defined that, but
Okay.
I'm talking about the what if, with the what if situation where an agency is not able to provide the legal representation to defend the people of the state and their natural resources.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Jennifer Osborne, Department of Finance. This one doesn't work. Jennifer Osborne, Department of Finance. The proposal before you actually really doesn't, we don't believe, materially change the way things would operate. If in the situation that you mentioned that maybe a large lawsuit came and there was not sufficient resources to provide adequate legal representation for some of those commissions or any other state department, there would be probably under the current system, as it currently stands, if this proposal was not to go forward, those departments would have to submit a deficiency request. Under this proposal, if the amount that we propose to allocate to them, which is meant to be reflective of past hours used, is insufficient to handle some sort of large case that comes forward, we would, again, look to them to submit a deficiency request. Those are unanticipated cases. We think that they fit perfectly within the realm of the deficiency process. But this particular proposal really is just meant to shift the responsibility for paying and as well as funding to the departments that utilize the Department of Justice's legal resources. They already are short the funds to do it. So we don't see really any difference between having a department pay DOJ or having DOJ provide the services and having the department not pay. Either way, DOJ no longer has the level of resources that they previously had to devote to those clients.
Well, I'll allow the individual commissions, I assume are all represented here today, to speak for themselves, but it's my distinct impression that they've all been seriously affected by the budgetary crisis, and in fact, we increase the threat to our resources and we reduce the deterrent for people to violate the law or legally challenge the regulatory decisions or roles of those commissions if we are not providing sufficient legal defense. So I'll let them address the impact that the economy and the budget have already had on their capacity. But I know, speaking for my district, offices have been closed and shrunk, and staff availability for enforcement has been reduced, and so I think we're going after the fundamental role of the state in defending its resources.
Can I just maybe add, we are actually giving them money to pay. We're not requiring them to just pay for their legal costs out of their existing budget. We have a plan to give them resources to pay DOJ at their hourly rate.
And the Chair will note the arrival of Assemblymember Ruskin, whom the Chair invited to this hearing because of his interests, both personal and in terms of his role as sub-chair of a sister subcommittee. So welcome. And you're welcome to participate or ask questions as any other member would. Thank you. A couple of questions. from the chair. The proposed appropriation for the budget year starting July 1st is $53 million. But the hours that were worked by the Department of Justice in the year previous to the current year, in 0809, that amount was the equivalent of about $77 million. So we have a reduction from 77 to 53. How did the administration arrive at the proposed appropriation at this reduced level?
We took the amount that we're taking from DOJ's legal services is their current 9-10 level of $48.2 million. And we also had opportunity to take savings that were attributed to 9-10 and take those from DOJ and add it to this pot. So we added to the pot about $5 million for a total of a little over $53 million. So we took the current year level of legal services for these general fund clients.
And
Mr. Chairman, if I might, just to say
yes.
it a different way. So the 8-9 budget has the $16 million of general fund prior to the governor's veto of our, quote, savings from the furlough days. That money was taken last February for a budget that began in July. So this year, we're already $16 million less general fund than we had last year, and you're looking at the total number of hours we did last year.
Okay. Now, to the Department of Finance, the proposal would authorize the Department of Finance to approve allocation requests that for Department of Justice legal services. What criteria would Finance use to determine who gets an allocation?
We would work closely with DOJ and the analysts for those particular departments requesting funds, looking at historical workload data that DOJ has as far as how many hours they've worked, and also getting from DOJ a sense of the upcoming workload and looking at those allocations. We would be making allocations periodically, not all at once at the beginning of a fiscal year, and we would also have quarterly reporting to the legislature as to those allocations.
A word of caution to my colleagues. I'm a little concerned about having the Department of Finance that reports to the governor make decisions on requests that might involve parties that are potentially involved in litigation. I don't know if that causes others trouble, but it seems to blur the role and involve the administration in perhaps some potential conflicts. So if this item in some form were to go ahead, I would ask that we look at, or have staff look at, developing some type of criteria that would avoid these potential conflicts, and perhaps having someone else, whether it's the Department of Justice or someone else, to make those determinations.
If I may, one of the LAO's recommendations is to have a $1 million threshold for $1 million notification threshold for allocations that would exceed $1 million. We are fine with that suggestion, and we've been working with the LAO to develop language for a budget bill item that would reflect that.
Now, you mentioned that there were records available regarding the level of usage of access for legal services by the various departments. Why could we not go back and look at those historical amounts and build that amount into each agency's budget?
Mr. Chairman, in fact, I think that's part of the plan. When we look back over time, the hours reflect the level of resources. So our resources have been reduced. We can't necessarily do the same number of hours in years past as we can going forward. But we can look over 2 or 3 years to see if there's a trend. On the natural, are the number of hours declining over time? Are they level over time? Or are they increasing over time? With the allocation occurring sometime in July, we'll also have the benefit of this fiscal year's hours to apply and consider in addition to last year's hours, or maybe the last 2 years of hours. What we're trying to avoid in one sense is to overfund a preset number of hours by any one client and lose that ability to have that discussion on, are the services actually warranted and needed? Is there a better way to perform that service, either by the department or by somebody else?
But let me pose a hypothetical, though. If it's one central fund that we're looking at. And let's take the Department of Corrections, that I'm told has used about 2/3 of the available funds for legal services. What if they were to absorb most of the appropriation? What if they were to squeeze out the ability of others to access that central fund? What would prevent that if we have a central fund?
You're correct that the Department of Corrections is the largest general fund client of DOJ, but in terms of doing this allocation, our role at Finance is not to be kind of a control agency. We're simply here to kind of allocate the funds pursuant to previous patterns of usage. And obviously, to the extent that corrections in the number of hours have been used over previous years, they actually represent the largest opportunity for us to look at the way that they operate. And I think that they would concur that even looking within their own way that they operate could probably find some level of efficiencies. But our intention is to not give the money all to one department and at the expense of the others. We simply plan to allocate the funds generally even if we did on a prorated basis, we would ensure that everyone got what they were supposed to get. This added process of reviewing historical usage and asking departments to see whether every single hour that they use is critical is simply a way to address the fact that there's a shortfall between the number of hours that were used in 8-9 and the number that are currently available in 9-10 and will be available going forward.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might, to look at it another way, the $48 million that we're trading here essentially for legal services, about $30 million of that is for corrections work. So when you have a client who is the single largest state ops general fund budget primarily in government, their opportunity to find savings within their budget and to reduce their demand for our services is greater than any other client in government. And so if the budget is $9 billion, or for sake of argument, it's less than 0.1% of savings to fund all of our legal work. We believe there are ways to find savings in their budget, but there's no structural mechanism in place to encourage that, because they view us as a free legal resource and they simply send us all of their work. Because this is defense work, we don't have the option to decline the work. We have to represent the client.
And my concern is, I understand that there's a desire to have some control, or to have finance be in a position where they can exert some control over the spending. But at the same time, there is the possibility that that control function could be misused for other reasons. And I don't see anything in writing that would lay out what those limitations might be or how we might avoid those situations. I'm not casting aspersions personally. I'm just saying structurally that the potential is there for the next governor to use a heavy hand, if you will, and to encourage or discourage behavior through this control function.
We would just note that, I mean, we going into this, we're actually kind of surprised by the level of, I guess, controversy that's come out of this. I don't think we expected it. I think we thought that our biggest challenge would be the Department of Corrections, and so it was somewhat of a surprise to hear from the resources departments that have the concern. But if there's, I mean, we are open to suggestions on something that addresses the concern about someone having too much control or not. I mean, we really saw this as a ministerial function. It's just a central place to put it until we can figure out what is the right dollar amount to put in the departmental budgets.
Yeah, I think that's right. The control section really should be viewed as kind of an interim solution on how you take the $48 million from our budget and allocate it to our general fund clients, knowing that picking any 1 year of hours may not be the best year to pick. So that, or maybe over a 2-year period, I think the analysts recommended a 1-year period, but maybe 1, 2, 3, we'd probably prefer 2. A 2-year period, we have a better chance to look at what is a kind of a baseline level of attorney hours, and then build that budget into the client's budget.
Do we not have access to that information going back
we have access to the hours, but again, the hours are reflective of a higher level of service provided by our attorneys. So there essentially 130 more attorneys provided those number of hours.
But there is some information.
Yeah, there are hours by client that we can look to as kind of a guide. Absolutely.
Member Reskin, and then Member Chesbro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And tomorrow morning, Sub 3 has a hearing, and we will a regular budget Sub 3 hearing. We will also pay attention to this issue, and I invite you to join us as well as any of your members. And thank you for your invitation here. I have a question and then some observations and some cautionary comments. My question is, what has been the record of the public rights agencies in overspending or not overspending their funds in terms of legal actions from the department?
Under the Brown administration, none of our legal divisions have had a deficiency of any kind, and that's partly due to the resources we had available prior to the veto last year. So again, I keep going back to it, but we simply have $30 million fewer resources available today than we had 12 months ago, and we can't continue to do the same level of work for everybody.
Yeah, but I think the combination of putting everybody in the same package, I think is basically a mistake. I don't think it's a wise course of action when there have not necessarily been problems in certain areas to change the procedures. And I think, Mr. Chairman, I think why it's inadvisable is in the same line of thought that you brought up. This is an important function, the function of the Attorney General's office in either defending or bringing suit for an agency. It is, I think it's really important that the line between the legislature and the Attorney General's office and the line between the administration and the Attorney General's office, that those lines not be blurred, so that everyone is certain that the Attorney General's office can deliver the service that is truly required of agencies in the course of their action, in the pursuit of their duties. Having an intermediary function may serve a purpose in the short run. The real question is, does it serve the purpose of the long run? And I think we should hesitate to make significant changes in terms of really what amounts in a way to constitutional process, the possibility of it affecting the things that you were referring to and even more, that we may make changes in the short run to adapt to a situation that really create long-term damage and that make it more difficult for the agencies to do their work. I know, for example, that the Coastal Commission, for example, has no independent penalty authority. So it is really dependent in terms of actions being brought more than any other agency of its sort on the Attorney General. And should there be an unnecessary screening device between their needs and the Attorney General's office, then I think that could cause harm to the environment. So I think what we're looking at here is a solution that is a fiscal solution, but that has constitutional ramifications. And I'm not sure it's the most prudent action to take.
Yeah. Member Chesbrough.
Going back to earlier questions and answers, I want to make sure I understand. Did I understand you to say, Finance, that this in the budget year, coming budget year, this does not represent fiscal savings to the budget? There's no savings associated with it?
This is not a savings proposal. This is simply a way of getting at the problems that are currently going on in DOJ's budget, and which maybe some clients haven't yet actually had to deal with, but probably will by the end of this year.
Okay, and then my next question is, I don't know if you have this information at your fingertips. If not, when the commissions speak, if you have this information, I'd appreciate it. But I'm trying to figure out the LAO suggestion, which I believe Finance said they'd support, of under $1 million being allowed without the Department of Finance approval. How that compares to, for each of the 4 resource protection commissions, compares to their litigation budget in recent years. Do we have any context of what that $1 million might mean?
I can give you, I guess, a rough example. A document that we received earlier in the summer from the Department of Justice kind of showed where they had billed, how many hours they'd billed a client through August 31st of 2009, and the Coastal Commission had essentially been billed, and they used the term billed meaning those are how many hours they've chalked up to work on that client. It's not obviously at this point a bill for the client, but it's how they track their hours. They had basically done 2,200 hours of work for the Coastal Commission as of August 31st, and we're basically projecting by the end of the current fiscal year about a 13,000 hour usage for the entire year. They're compared to their budgeted hours, which are reflective of their currently reduced budget, which they have about 7,200 hours budgeted for that client. Using the 13,000 hours as basically if that was kind of their ongoing usage from previous years, it would be about $3 million, maybe 2.5.
2.2.
2.2 is the.
Let me try and say it this way. On average, Coastal Commission about 13,000 hours of attorney hours that are allocated to them on an annual basis. Using our current billing rate of $170 an hour, it's about $2.2 million is what they would pay for our legal services starting July 1st. If you want to put some threshold amount as to who finance can oversee or not oversee, that's one option. Or you can simply build an appropriation into the Coastal Commission's budget for an amount of about $2.2 million. Anything over that amount, as far as additional need, there's already a deficiency process in the budget that they can go to finance for. We can go with them. We can quantify what is the remainder of the need for the fiscal year and get a deficiency allocation. So the mechanisms are in place to protect the interests of our client. At the end of the day, that's what we want to do. But we've tried now, at least with respect for Department of Corrections over the last 2 years, to just receive $3 to $5 million for growing casework. The subcommittees have been very good about appropriating and approving those requests. We go to the conference committee, and each time the conference committee says, we don't want to spend any more money litigating. You got to find a way to solve these to solve these lawsuits. We can't think of another way to compel a client we can't compel a client to settle. So unless the client, in a general sense now, has some type of a vested interest in the cost of that litigation, we don't know another way to talk about settlement.
Well, like Mr. Rushkin, I sure feel a whole lot more comfortable with each of these commissions dealing with their attorney in trying to decide whether to settle than having to go to the Department of Finance in terms of who's accountable to whom. And I might point out that at least 3 of these commissions have some degree or other of independence of the administration in the law and are expected by their enabling statute or by the voters, in the case of the Coastal Commission, there's certainly the governor's represented, but his representatives are one of the parties at the table helping with the decision-making process in each case, but it's a diversified decision-making process that deserves independent legal representation.
Okay, if there's no additional questions, I'd like to call the next group of folks to come and provide testimony to the committee. These are Commissioner Sarah Wan, Mr. Peter Douglas, and Mr. Paul Thayer. Yes, if you could... Mr. Nava, would you like to join the committee members up on the dais?
No. Someone like Dr. Tester.
Okay.
She wanted from the dais. Mr. Chair, can we have a vote on that particular item? Is that Kevin Jeffries? No, sir. No, that was Paul Cook.
I guess your recall failed, right?
Hi, Paul.
Who would like to go first?
I'll go first and then let you guys get into the details. I'm Sarah Wan. I'm a California Coastal Commissioner. And I just want to say a few things about our coastal program and the impact that this will have on it. Our coastal program has been a model for the entire world, and this is due to the coastal program, including the Coastal Act and the manner in which the Commission has implemented the Act. That implementation has been possible in part because of the independence of the Commission, as Assemblymember Chesbrough has indicated. Its basic structure of 3 equal appointing authorities and our ability to back up the program when necessary through the legal system. This proposal, quite frankly, jeopardizes that independence in numerous ways. By requiring us to compete for limited funds, and the funds are limited, with no assurance that they will be available, it hamstrings our ability to carry out the mandates of the Coastal Act. The policy implications of this, combined with the requirement that we get the Department of Finance permission, is most disturbing. The policy decisions of the Commission are made by the Commission and should not be made by the Department of Finance. The current proposal removes the ability of the Commission to determine what those policies should be. It would strip away the Commission's ability to enforce the Coastal Act, defend itself against lawsuits, or even file lawsuits when it identifies a violation of environmental laws. The Commission could not decide to require the removal of something placed on the beach that blocks the public's right to access the beach, or to seek remedies from someone who cuts off a mountaintop. The Commission might no longer be able to deny an inappropriate project or even place conditions on that project because of our possible inability to defend ourselves if legal action is taken against the Commission. And I want to say that when we deal with this, we are, in most cases, defending ourselves against action that is taken by us or by others against this state. The Commission would have to take its chances that funds would still be available when those actions are taken by others. This agency, unlike others, has no ability to raise outside funds. It cannot impose fines, and it does not retain fines imposed by the courts. If funds in the general pool were available, it would have to spend its own money, which it doesn't have, to attempt to get the Department of Finance to allow the litigation. Actually cost the state more money. The Department of Finance, quite frankly, is not qualified to make the sorts of policy decisions necessary to decide if litigation is appropriate or if the Commission made the right decision. These policy decisions are and should be determined by those who sit on the Commission. That is why there is a Commission. The current arrangement results in the Assembly having a say in those decisions, since the Assembly appoints 4 of the 12 commissioners to the. However, this proposal puts the ultimate decision of the policy squarely in the hands of the governor, and frankly, it effectively removes your authority and ability to influence those policy decisions, which I'm certain you will agree that removing the independence of the Commission and diluting your authority is not desirable. I'd just like to point out one other thing about the coast, which should be self-evident, but the coast, quite frankly, is the economic engine of this state. I am certain you don't want to do anything to undermine our coastal economy, particularly at a time like this. According to a study published in 2005 by the National Ocean Economics Program in a report to the Resources Agency of California on the gross state ocean economic product in 2000, it was about $42.9 billion and almost 700,000 jobs, including tourism and recreation, living resources, coastal construction, shipping, and ports. And I'm going to quote from that report. It says, "The natural resources of the coast and coastal ocean are a solid foundation for California's economy, and those resources must be sustained to maintain the strength in the 6 sectors evaluated within the ocean economy and the much larger coastal economy. In my opinion, this proposal would undermine the long-term and very successful strategy to protect that economy that this state has had over the last 35 years. In summary, I would hope you would not agree that it is in the interest of this state or this legislature to allow this to move forward, and I would ask that you make the decision to exempt the Coastal Commission, the State Lands Commission, and BCDC from this proposal. I ask that you make that decision today to send a strong message. Don't allow this to go any further than it has. Frankly, I have faith in your good judgment and that you understand the importance of taking action to correct this proposal now.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Peter Douglas. I'm the Executive Director of the California Coastal Commission. Appreciate the opportunity to comment. I was going to say many of the same things that Commissioner Wan said, but I think there's no doubt in our minds as we look at the impact of this proposal that it will eviscerate the California Coastal Act by crippling the ability of the Commission to defend and enforce the law protecting public rights to and public resources, public rights of access, public rights that affect anyone who wishes to enjoy public resources on our coast. There's no doubt in our mind that this will generate more litigation, not less. When this was discussed at the Commission meeting last week, I already saw attorneys in the audience smiling. I did have a conversation with one who said, gee, we can just sue you and know that you're not going to have the money to defend yourselves, and so we'll be able to skate. That's clearly what the message is out there. Destroying the independence of the Commission is another major concern. When the Coastal Initiative was put together in 1972, and then the Coastal Act in '76, two of the pillars of the law were the ability to defend and to enforce the Coastal Act by making objective decisions on what lawsuits or litigation will be initiated, and also the independence of the Commission. This would give the Department of Finance the authority to decide what lawsuits we would be able to defend or initiate, which I think will destroy the integrity of California's coastal program. The problems driving this proposal we don't see applying to the Coastal Commission or state lands or BCDC or even some of the other land law agencies. We don't control who sues the Commission. We don't have any authority over that, so we can't anticipate what level of legal representation we need. So we don't see that this will work in any event, and we certainly don't see it as a cost-saving measure. In fact, it'll cost more money. If transparency is an issue, we don't have a problem submitting reports every year on the litigation that we're involved in. We work very closely with the Attorney General's office. We don't just frivolously go in and initiate litigation. We also do settle those that we think are worthy of settling, and the public gets the benefit from the impact to their resources. So we work closely already with the Attorney General. So from our perspective, excluding the land law, well, or having it just apply to the Department of Corrections would be the first, and then the second would be to exclude the land law agencies that are general fund supported in their litigation, and thirdly, as Commissioner Wan indicated, to specifically exempt the three agencies we're talking about here. We would like to urge closure on this issue for us because we're already feeling the consequences. We have discussions with the Attorney General's office about some very controversial matters that are coming forward and that may well result in litigation, and are already being told, well, you know, we're going to bill you for this. So you have to decide whether or not you're going to have the money to defend the public's rights here, or whether or not you're going to have to take money from your core program. So from our perspective, this is a very insidious proposal that we hope this committee brings closure to quickly, so that we don't have it lingering out there and taking on a life of its own and having very negative consequences on our ability to carry out the law. Thank you.
Additional testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Paul Thayer. I'm the Executive Officer at the State Lands Commission. I have to give a little caveat first. Unlike Peter, our commission meets less frequently, and we haven't had the opportunity as a staff to bring this to the commission for them to look at this yet. But on a staff level, certainly we share a lot of the concerns of the two previous witnesses. But we have a distinction. The State Lands Commission is the land manager, acts as the land owner for the state. We're not a regulatory agency like Peter's commission or BCDC. And our concerns are over trespass on public resources, public lands, and also assuring that the state gets the revenue that it deserves from the leases on public lands. And we see this proposal as being a threat to our ability to collect the just revenue that's due the state. The concern is that in the long run, this, and the AG's representative agrees, that this is meant to be a cap on the amount of money that's available for us to do the enforcement. And the public perception of that cap is as important as our perception of that. So if the public doesn't believe, and particularly transgressors believe, that we don't have the resources to pursue them, they see this as open season to do what they want on the public's land. By way of example, our last big litigation involved Hansen dredging. Hansen dredges sand from San Francisco Bay. We in the Attorney General's office believe that they were shortchanging the state. We sued. We obtained a settlement of $40 million. The amount of money that we're being allocated per year under this formula is about $1.4 million. So that with that one case, we in effect earned for the state 25, 30 years worth of the legal costs that we incur for the state. Several years before that, we were involved in the Port of Los Angeles. That wasn't a case of revenue taken from the state, but it was being diverted by the city of Los Angeles for general purposes. It wasn't being kept at the port where it belonged. We worked with the Attorney General's office and sued in that case too. The settlement brought $60 million back to the port. So those are the kinds of revenue hits that this proposal could cause. The threat of litigation, we think, actually increases settlement more than the lack of revenues. Our concern is that if you can't show that you can litigate, then there's no reason for the trespasser or the person who owes us money to settle with us or to give us the money. And we've had lower level cases just recently. There's a peer that wasn't reporting revenues to us that without litigation, we were able to recover, we think we're going to get about $70,000, not that much, but without a cent to the AG's office. I don't think we would have had that opportunity if we didn't have a real perceivable threat of litigation. It also hurts our enforcement by example process. Now, we can't possibly go after all the trespassers. We don't really want to do that. It's too much resources. So we rely on going on somebody in an area where we think there are a number of entities that are trespassing, and we pursue that one, with the theory that if we're successful on that the others will come in line, and that's what happens. But why should the others care if you only have the resources, if it's perceived you only have the resources to go after one? This enforcement by example just doesn't work anymore. We are trying to proactively reduce our legal costs, and actually we have a bill that's being carried that would give us the authority to impose administrative fines. And we think that process will, in the long run, reduce our reliance on the AG's office. So we're looking for ways to control our costs. So in conclusion, again, we at the staff level believe that this proposal, because it imposes a very public cap, will make it more difficult for us to go against trespassers who are misusing publicly owned property, and will decrease our ability to enforce the rent that's a required part of our leases.
Member Nava?
Yeah, this is a really bad idea at the worst possible time. I served for 8 years as a member of the California Coastal Commission, first appointed by then Lieutenant Governor Cruz Bustamante, and then reappointed 3 times by Senate Pro Tem John Burton. And during those 8 years, came to truly appreciate the complexity and how difficult it is to protect the California coastline. And there's 1,100 miles of that coastline, and the last time I looked, they're not making any more. And so every time you lose a part of it, it is a loss to all of the people, not just of California, but to the people of this country, as well as to visitors who come from all over the world. And it was apparent to me that there are developers who have extraordinary resources, who are not the least bit shy or restrained about pushing the envelope and about conducting themselves with the motto of they'd rather apologize than ask for permission. And it is only because the Coastal Commission has the ability to vigorously enforce its laws through the respected Attorney General's office that there's even any restraint whatsoever on developers and on polluters who would poison the environment and eliminate the pleasure of that for all of the rest of us. So I mean, I can't even begin to imagine what our closed sessions would have been like as we consider taking action against violators of the Coastal Act, if part of our calculation would have been how much is it going to cost us to enforce the public right, because that's what it's about. It is about enforcing the public's right, whether it be of access to the coastline or enforcing the public's right to the protection of habitat and preservation of our precious coastline. So it is clear to me that this proposal that takes the decision-making on litigation away from the independent entities themselves is nothing less than a power grab by the part of the administration, and handing to the Department of Finance the discretion to make a decision about whether or not state lands can go forward or whether the Coastal Commission can go forward is truly a corruption of the public's expression of support for both the Coastal Act and for the State Lands Commission and for BCDC. And I think it's incumbent upon this subcommittee to express its opposition to this concept to the administration and the Department of Finance with a resounding rejection.
Thank you. Anybody in the audience wish to testify on this matter? If you would, because of the time, if you would be as short as you possibly can. And no repeating testimony, please.
No, I'm Paul Mason with the Pacific Forest Trust. I've also been working with the broad umbrella of Green California, who's identified this as an issue of really high priority for all the reasons that the speakers just made. I mean, it's kind of a hard act to follow. I think some of them Nava really laid out the concerns there. Just to make a couple of other observations, in addition to the fact that this really does strike at the heart of the independence of these commissions to enforce our public rights, there's not a monetary savings here. I don't see what the rush is to go into this new approach that so fundamentally changes the ability of the public to have these commissions represent us, that we need to be doing it on a quick timeline. I'd also note, as the staff analysis does, the Department of Corrections is the real driver here. I mean, it's 2/3 of the problem. Maybe this could be approached by having them come in and explain how is it that your litigation budget is through the roof here, that's more than 20 times as much as the Coastal Commission or anyone else who gets sort of lumped in. Can we think of other ways to get at the core issue rather than these sweeping changes that affect these other agencies that frankly I don't really think were the big part of the problem. But thank you.
Mr. Chair, Michael Endicott with Sierra Club, California. I want to thank you very much. I won't repeat the remarks. You honed in already on some of the key aspects of this budget proposal. The agencies have different purposes. They have different decision-making structures. The part that I kind of want to focus on is that litigation isn't a choice you want to make as a regulator. The Coastal Commission, for instance, has to walk a fine line. On the one hand, they might get sued by the person that's applying for the permit. On the other hand, they might be sued by organizations such as mine if they don't handle the permit according to the law. It's not a choice they want to make. And if you're sitting in the regulator's shoes, litigation is never the thing you want to start out with because it's going to delay the process. It takes a long time. And you also, if you go to court, you might lose. So you always have as an incentive to begin with, even before you go to your decision-making body that the Coastal Commission, for instance, has, a great incentive not to pursue litigation as your first avenue of defense. You've identified the core reasons why we need to have this pool, why these agencies should be treated differently and where they sit. So I just want to state that that the coast is so important, and the governor is on TV in other countries advertising California's coast as a reason to come here. So it is important that we uphold that public trust. If you shave off my beard and make me look much better, I'm also speaking on behalf of Victoria Rome from NRDC and Linda Sheehan of the California Coast Keepers. Thank you very much.
Noted.
Thank you. I'm Fran Gibson with Coast Walk California, a statewide nonprofit dedicated to coastal access and coastal preservation and the completion of the 1,200-mile California Coastal Trail. I won't repeat anything. I just want to remind folks sitting here today who get to make this choice for the people of California that public trust issues require a long policy view and not a short one. I understand that the Department of Justice and the Attorney General is facing budget crunches here, but we really need to think through carefully what we're advocating here, and the idea that any public agency committed to public trust issues would have to go and ask the Department of Finance if they can bring a lawsuit is unacceptable. So please carry forth and come up with a long view decision that will protect the California Coastal Commission and the fine work it does. Otherwise, we'll be putting a stake through the heart of the Coastal Act, and I agree with Sarah Wan, Commissioner Wan. The coast of California is the economic engine of this state, and we must do everything we can to continue to protect and champion it. Thank you.
Any additional public testimony? Yes, please.
Yes, Joshua Stark on behalf of the California Native Plant Society, that we also are opposed. I won't repeat any other comments. They've all been made better than I could.
Okay. Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Our colleague, Mr. Nava, referred to the 1,100-mile long California coastline. Well, I represent about a third of that coastline, almost 400 miles. And but lest people think the coast is only for coastal residents, our former colleague, Senator Patrick Johnson, once after helping me with the coastal issue, I said, how come you care so much about the coast? He says, there's no coastline in Modesto. And so I thought that expressed the inland passion for the coast as well. I think all the issues, I won't repeat all of the reasons why the commissions are so important, but I think that given the fact that our primary duty in this budget process is to try to figure out how to get the heck out of the deficit with the least amount of damage, and it's been expressed by Department of Finance that there's not any savings here. And given the relatively small contribution to the problem that the Department of Justice has brought to us that is represented by these four commissions, I certainly hope that we could remove this at the earliest possible moment, most preferably now, and focus the attention where the greatest potential problem is, and also fulfill the voters' repeated expressed desire that we protect our waterways and our coastline and the San Francisco Bay.
Member Reskin?
Yeah, I again want to thank you for having me here on your dais. I just want to, much has been said, and I only want to add one point. There's an old saying that the power to tax is the power to destroy. I think that the power to stand between an independent agency and their legal counsel is also the power to destroy that independent agency. And I would concur with Mr. Chesbro's remarks. And thank you.
I'd like to ask a question and then provide some comments, hopefully, for some future direction on this issue. When requests for legal services are denied, and the entity chooses to or has the authority to seek outside counsel, do we track to see whether it was more expensive to use outside counsel than in-house counsel?
Generally, I'm going to say we at the Department of Justice don't track that. We'll authorize the client to hire outside counsel, but that's then a contract between the client and the outside counsel, and the client is responsible for keeping track of those costs.
Okay.
We do know, as a general practice, outside counsel is typically 2 to 3 or more times more expensive than our hourly rate. So any time that a client has to hire outside counsel, it's going to cost that client more than what we would charge on our hourly rate.
Okay. Elio?
The only thing I wanted to add is that DOJ, as was mentioned before, their attorney rate is $170 an hour, and according to a recent survey by the National Law Journal, the average hourly rate for an attorney is for a private attorney is about $350, which is consistent with the, 2 to 3 times more expensive.
Why did we leave private practice, Mr. Nava? What I'd like to suggest is this. I do believe the state needs to have some control over expenditures for legal services. We are in an era, like it or not, of limitations, and we're having to limit expenditures on many other programs that we would rather not, whether it's breast cancer detection or legal representation for the farm workers under the ALRB. I am interested in the proposal before us, but I have a number of major concerns. Principal among them is a concern that the proposal could cripple necessary enforcement functions by many departments and state organizations. I would like to suggest that we keep this item open and that we direct staff to work on a solution which addresses both of the concerns to preserve the integrity and the essential functions of departments and agencies, commissions, and also to look at a more defensible procedure for assuring us that all necessary requests would be approved, or there is some mechanism or criteria to use when determining when an allocation is, who gets an allocation. So if that's agreeable by consensus with the committee, unless there's violent objection, I'm kidding. That would be the chair's recommendation. I was looking to you to see if you'd pounce over the dais.
That's what it takes, Mr. Chairman, to get action today. I'll do it.
That would be the chair's recommendation. So, in other words, I do see that the Department of Justice is in a bind, and you're asking, I think, for some help in terms of how to allocate some scarce resources. But I am not pleased with the criteria that's been presented to us or the process by which those decisions would be made. I would like to see some escape valve or procedure to allow necessary work to go ahead, upon getting the necessary clearance. But with all due deference to the Department of Finance, I don't think that is a function that I would feel comfortable with in any way. I think it would have to be more made by somebody who is more knowledgeable with the legal aspects of the proposed litigation. But members, colleagues, is that acceptable to keep it open and to direct staff to try to work out something that's satisfactory on those two?
My one concern, Mr. Chair, was raised by several of the commission representatives relative to the impact of having this issue hanging on the behavior of the regulated communities. So I would feel a lot more comfortable with your suggested motion if there was a rather short timeline to try to get it back before the subcommittee, rather than leaving it to, the May revise or late in the process.
I would hope we would take this up well before the May revise. I can't assure you of a specific date, but it would be my intent to work with the parties and to encourage them to develop a proposal that would come back to us well before the revise. Sounds all right? And we'll work with all of the parties to try to address your particular concerns. I know some of you came a long distance to come and testify today. It has not been, I think it has been helpful to hear directly from you, and we will endeavor to try to take those concerns into account as we come up with a solution to help deal with this horrible budget that we're all having to deal with. And I can't begin to tell you how many people we see on a daily basis who say, don't cut me, don't cut me, don't. I know you have a problem, just don't cut me. And I think it's forcing us to rethink a number of ways that we've worked in the past. We will endeavor to be as fair and as reasonable as possible within the constraints that we have to work with, too. So, with that, thank you. We'll keep this item open, and we will bring it back as soon as possible. With that, we'll move to the following item, the issue number 2 under Department of Justice, the gun show program augmentation. And Member Jeffries asked that when we discuss this, that we revisit a prior issue that we had voted on. The chair has agreed to that request, so we will be taking up issue 2 under gun show program augmentation, and also going back to the dealer's record of sale workload increase under the consent calendar. Very well. Who would like to present to start this? Finance?
This proposal contains both a fund shift from general fund to the dealer's record of sale account, as well as additional funding to fund staff work for investigating and monitoring gun shows to prevent the illegal sale of firearms. The general fund savings is $616,000 associated with this proposal.
And a clarification, you're only talking about one new position, is that
correct? So there would be a shift of 4 positions and the funding for 1 additional position's worth of staff work. Okay.
Department of Justice?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Basically, it's kind of a 2-part proposal. There's a base program, 4 positions, $600,000 that's supported currently by the general fund. This BCP proposes to transfer funding from the general fund to the DROS fund. In addition, we're asking to augment the program by 1 position to increase the enforcement at the gun shows.
Okay. The chair has a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up to members. To the Department of Justice, is there currently a statutory limit on how many gun shows can be certified in California in a given year, or is that unlimited?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask Steve Lindley, our acting bureau chief, to come up and answer your specific questions.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Thank you. As long as they comply with the registration requirements and the licensing requirements, there's not a limit on how many gun shows that can take place in California.
Okay. And a follow-up question, how often does the Department of Justice gun show investigations, how often do they uncover illegal activity?
As far as like a percentage to how many investigations they conduct, as far as enforcement action?
Yes, yes.
It's kind of a tricky question. I think on average we'd probably say out of every 3 gun shows we're going to have some type of significant enforcement action. I think just the mere ideology that we're there, though, has a effect in order to reduce any type of actions by individuals that are there.
Let me ask a hypothetical question. The request is to increase personnel for enforcement activities at the gun shows. Would not another approach be to put a cap on the number of gun shows that can take place in California?
I think that would be a completely different issue. I don't think I'm really qualified to.
Do you have the authority to limit the number of gun shows?
I do not have the authority to limit the gun shows, no.
Okay, well. Colleagues, questions, comments on this item? Mr. Jeffries.
Yeah, do you happen to know the historic pattern on the number of gun shows in the state versus where we are in the last year? Are we having more gun shows or are we having less?
I think the last several years we've been fairly consistent with around 90 to 100 gun shows in the state of California.
What has changed over the last several years that warrants additional positions?
We lost some funding in general fund, I believe in fiscal year 08-09.
I understand the fiscal, but what's warranted additional positions?
That 1 additional position will gain back 1 of the 3 that we lost 2 years ago.
I'm going to play it by ear.
Okay.
We're still shorter staffed than what we were a couple years ago.
Okay.
So it's not a net number of positions so much as trying to backfill some previously lost positions?
Correct.
If I...
Yes, please continue. I'm sorry for the interruption.
The major violations or significant violations that are being found at 1 out of every 3 shows, or 1 out of whatever the number is, are those of the licensed individuals operating within the gun show, or are those people who are pulling their cars up out in the parking lot doing illegal transactions? Are we finding, I guess that's my question.
As far as the licensed firearms dealers that are there, very few violations. I think they understand the law fairly well, and they try very hard as law-abiding citizens in order to comply with that. Some of the violations that we do see on other issues are minor little paperwork glitches that can be contributed to human error. Most of the crimes that we're looking at are individuals that are going there to either purchase or sell guns illegally.
Okay, and so if I could characterize this, you have a lot of law-abiding gun dealers doing it in a forum that is authorized, paying the fees that they're required to pay. Essentially, this sounds a little bit more devious, infiltrated by those who are less respective of the law and the requirements, but it is the licensed ones who are going to pay the price more than anybody else, because they're attracting the bad elements. Is that a fair assessment? I mean, you wouldn't have these problems unless they had their gun show. Is that kind of where we would go with this?
Kind of a bit of a loaded question
Yeah.
with that. I just think whenever you have an event that attracts individuals to purchase and sell firearms, there's going to be, I think historically, a large portion of those people that are law-abiding citizens. Unfortunately, it also does attract a smaller percentage that are not, because the criminals need to obtain their firearms someplace. And just the ones that are law-abiding, I think some oversight from our Bureau as far as the regulation and the enforcement of the laws that we have on the books helps them to stay law-abiding. But, you know, there's a great deal of activity that happens at a gun show that is hard to regulate without enforcement staff being there.
Is there any way for you to generate those stats over the last 5 or 6 years as to the number of gun shows and the number of officers or individuals you've had available, potentially cross-referencing that to the number of citations or violations that have been issued? I mean, let me get to the bottom of my concern. Over the next 30, well, probably over the next 60 to 120 days, we're going to make some budget decisions that nobody in the state's going to be happy with. And the concept of me adding any additional position to any additional agency is just, I can't go there. I mean, I just can't go there. We'll be lucky to keep the employees we have in many departments. So that's one underlying issue for me, is authorizing another position. The next issue I have, and I'd kind of direct this one for the chair and the benefit of the members, we have a fund that has almost $18 million sitting in it. We've had a number of years of alleged that the fees are going to be reduced, but they never seem to be reduced. At some point here...
Other than the vehicle license fees, but...
Yeah. At some point here, those that are paying into this fund need to be getting their dollars worth and not being overcharged, and we have a responsibility as well to make sure that we're not piling on additional unnecessary positions. So I kind of want to do a little slower approach to this. I'm very, very hesitant to add any new position to anybody's department, and unfortunately I missed that on the consent calendar, but we had one where we added another 2 positions for card club monitoring. Well, are we really threatened in California by card clubs and we need to add more positions? I mean, that's kind of another issue, but I just have some concerns here. So.
Well, would it be fair to draw this analogy that if there is a liquor store that allows a nuisance to occur on its property, wouldn't it be held liable for that nuisance on its property, even though it wasn't committing that nuisance itself?
As far as our gun show regulations, that's kind of how it's a very good analogy between gun show regulations and the establishment that's there in a liquor store. We look towards regulation. We want them to be in compliance. We want to make sure that proper business is conducted there, that the vendors that go there can provide services in a safe environment, can sell their guns legally in California, and not really have any problems imposed upon them by the criminal element. That's our goal. I think ultimately if we could get to the place like at an alcohol establishment that there are no violations, that's where we want to get to. Unfortunately, that's not happening. So to ensure that we do have some sort of regulation there and that people are following the rules, we attend these gun shows. And by our presence there or the presumed presence there, enforces some of these laws for us.
Finance, are you not in the process currently of revising those fees downward? Or DOJ?
Chairman, actually, the Attorney General is finalizing a regulation package and will be submitting it for public comment probably within the next 30 to 60 days. I think the initial proposal is to take the fee back down to the $14 statutory level and then adjust possibly with public comments. But yeah, we are in the process of reducing the gross fee.
I just want to know how we missed that, because I thought we raided every possible fund last year. Never mind. Any additional questions or comments on this item? Member Cook?
Oh, I don't know. I'm just worried about this perception that if you go to a gun show, you're tarred and feathered. It's almost like, and I've gone to gun shows. I'll probably go to them again. My background, obviously, a number of different weapons I was familiar with. I'm kind of interested in the technology and what's going on. Obviously, it has to be regulated because criminal elements also are interested in some of these things. I just hope that we're not stereotyping a particular industry, particularly the individuals that are going through the points of the regulations and meeting it and everything else simply because of the nature of the wares that they're selling. So some people, you say gun and it's and as I said, I'm one of those ones that in the past and still am interested in different weapons, and so I hope I don't get arrested at a gun show next time I go. But anyway, this is a tough dilemma.
Although driving down the freeway, seeing a CHP car on the side does tend to get people to slow down and obey the law.
It does, and I'm so I'm supposed to slow down when I drive into the. No,
LAO, any comments or analysis on this?
We don't have any concerns with this proposal.
Okay. Let me open it up, unless the Department of Justice has some concluding comments. Any public testimony on this item? If you could, Sergeant, if you could have him go to the corner microphone.
Mr. Chairman and members, Sam Paredes representing Gun Owners of California, and I'd like to put a little bit of a different light on this given the discussion that's taken place. Number one, the Department of Justice should be commended for the activities that they've already been conducting at gun shows in California. As a matter of fact, the University of California Davis study that's cited in the information provided by the committee here points out that there are issues with gun shows throughout the country. But in fact, this exact study points out that California is by far the model, the best, the most law-abiding gun show program in the entire country. Number one, with the fewest number of crimes or violations committed of any other state. That is what California is. You find that dealers in California, those who have licenses and conduct business at a gun show, they do not want to do anything. They to jeopardize their license. They are audited by the good people of the Department of Justice on an annual basis. They're audited by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms on an annual basis. If they were to do something wrong, and that is when they catch the uncrossed T and the undotted I's and the abbreviations that might take place when they fill out the paperwork, they would lose their license. And in fact, from everything, the gun shows are self-policing. None of the gun show promoters want to do anything to jeopardize their business. We're talking about small charitable organizations that hold gun shows on a annual basis throughout the state of California. You have the large commercial gun show operators who hold them, and they all do the same thing. They all do everything they can to weed out anybody who's even a potential bad apple. They have their own people policing the floors. It's not a situation like the Highway Patrol where people at a gun show go by, oh, there's a police officer there, I got to make sure I try to transfer this gun legally. The vast majority of the time, DOJ officers are there undercover. Nobody knows that they're there. So the gun shows in California are, we're talking almost a pristine business that is occurring in the state of California. You go back and you check all of the violations that have been committed at gun shows over the last 10 years, the vast majority of them are going to be parking tickets in the parking lot. And not the old story of guns being traded in trunks outside and stuff. That's a thing of the past in California. It's not happening. If it were to happen, let me tell you, virtually every jurisdiction in the state of California would take that as a great opportunity to put it on the press and do a big video thing about it, but that isn't the case. We think that the fund that they are asking to take money out of was established by statute to pay for our background checks, when we register a firearm. The Steinberg bill a couple of years ago opened it up to be able to be used for the enforcement of the rules and laws with regards to the purchase and registration and regulation of firearms. We think that's an appropriate use. This is not. This is now starting to do extracurricular things. You know, I worked in 2 administrations, and I remember what it was like trying to, how am I going to cover all my PYs here, and we're going to take a piece of here and a piece of there and fund them all here in order to keep the personnel here to do the job that's a tough thing that every agency in the state has to deal with right now. But in this case, given this fund that has a statutory requirement that it be revisited and it should be raised or lowered to appropriately cover the expenses. We are now adding expenses that were never envisioned for this fund and funding those expenses. When this $17 million surplus disappears, the law gives the agency the ability to up the dealer record of sales fee in order to pay for the added expenses that they've put in there. So now it's no longer a general fund expense. It's a perennial funding through the special fund, the dealer record of sales fund. Law-abiding gun owners and purchasers, they're not afraid. They willingly pay their fees to do background checks. They want people to know that they're law-abiding citizens. And this is taking it just one step too far.
So you appreciate the work they do, but don't want it paid out of this fund?
You know, they're doing it with what they've got right now. They're asking for another position to do more of this. Well, you know, we hear stories about them sending officers to Nevada to go to gun shows in Nevada and park in parking lots to look to see how many California people are there and then checking out to see if they're violating the laws and things like that. You know, they're doing just fine with what the evidence is there. That with the staff they've got right now, the personnel they've got, at the funding levels they've got, they're achieving the goals and keeping crime out of gun shows as it is. They don't need any more.
Provided we continue to put general fund money into their operation.
They're not, but they're not losing general. According to the information that we've seen, they're not.
But we have a $20 billion problem.
What's that?
And we have a $20 billion problem.
Understand?
And you know, I understand, you know, your comments, and it's really more directed, I think, to the general situation. We have to find ways to make reductions, and sometimes they may be big reductions, sometimes it's a lot of small reductions. In this case, there's no assurance that there would be continued general fund support, at least at that level. And if the safety were to go down, I think a lot of localities would think twice about sponsoring these types of activities. So, you know, I think maybe we ought to look at the larger picture of how can we continue providing a forum for these activities and still provide a safe environment in. So I thank you for your comments.
Yes, sir.
Member Jeffries?
I'll wait and see if there's any public
Okay. Any additional public comments?
And I appreciate the chair's comments too. They not only apply to this scenario, but the previous one as well. I mean, there's just some ugly decisions out there, and I fully appreciate trying to move some things off of the general fund that is going bankrupt. I'm wondering if it wouldn't be appropriate to see what's going to happen to this fund as more positions shift to it for the long term, and if the fund is going to be operating in a deficit based on the projections of the number of positions that move from the general fund to be supported by this fund, what that curve is going to look like, and then also
whether it's sustainable and what the long-term impacts are.
whether it's sustainable or not. I think that's question number 2, and then the next one is what is going to become of the fees based on that projection. I mean, we're being told today, they're looking at reducing the fees. Okay, is that good until we pass this? If we pass this and the previous one and more positions are moved from the general fund over, does that mean that this fee is now not going to be reduced and is in fact going to be increased? I think it would be appropriate to have that answer before we proceed.
LAO, is that something that you could provide within a couple of weeks or so?
We would note that under the current fund condition, which does assume the addition of these positions, the revenue exceeds expenditures and the fund balance is growing. So the fund as it currently stands is able to handle both the workload from the gun show and the spending related to the DROS workload increase. However, we haven't seen updated projections on the impact to the revenues that would occur if the fund was lowered. So that's something.
Well, why don't we get that additional information in Department of Justice, if you can work with the LAO, and we'll keep this open, Mr. Jeffries, then until we get that information.
It's not that I'm adamantly opposed to shifting these from the general fund over to the special fund. I understand that. I just want to make sure we're making an informed decision. So that's all.
Okay. Very well. Then that shall be the will of the committee. We'll keep this open and pending this item. The consent items were already passed, Mr. Jeffries.
Yeah, and I just, because I have to go to a meeting, I need to show a no vote then on the consent items.
Very well. So reflected. We'll turn to the first item then on, thank you all, the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Issue number 1, Sex Offender Management Board and Sarazzo Review Committee. There's a approve as budgeted. Mr. Jeffries, do you have a view on this next item in light of your other commitments?
Item number
It'd be item issue 1 under Department of Corrections.
yeah, we're okay with that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll be back.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's okay. Let's go to this item then, and who will be presenting? Finance?
Justin Howard, Department of Finance. The governor's budget is requesting to continue funding for the Sex Offender Management Board as well as the Sarazzo Review Committee, 3.5 positions, and a little over $500,000. This money was in the budget on a limited term basis, and there was recent legislation that extended the board on an indefinite basis, and this would continue the funding for the work that they do on an ongoing basis.
Okay. LAO, any comments or concerns? A couple of questions. It's my understanding that the Sex Offender Management Board recently issued a report with some findings and recommendations. Can you summarize those findings and recommendations and how the department's going to implement them?
I'm not prepared at this point to really summarize that. We can certainly provide that to you very shortly. However, the Sex Offender Management Board did present its report recently, and it did have a number of findings related to the way that we supervise sex offenders in the state, and the residency restrictions for sex offenders and their efficacy as far as public safety goes. We can certainly provide you those, but that effort is just the beginning, I think, of the efforts for the Sex Offender Management Board. A lot of ongoing effort related to local local jurisdictions imposing tighter restrictions and those being reviewed as well at the request of those jurisdictions. So there is a great deal of ongoing workload that needs to be done related to sex offender management in the state, I think, as we can all see from recent events as well.
I appreciate receiving your analysis of the findings and recommendations and would so request in writing. Can you describe in general how valuable a tool the board is in helping state and local law enforcement better address public safety concerns with known sex offenders?
I think there's a great deal of value with the board addressing those issues. Sex offenders and their effect on public safety and their the general effects are something that generally in the past has been hidden from sight and not addressed well in the public. We've, obviously through Jessica's law and other laws have begun to address the impacts of sex offenders on the community, but still some of those things, and we've reacted with some strong requirements as far as sex offender registration, sex offender housing, restrictions, GPS monitoring, and we're only now beginning to see the long-term effects of some of those things, and that the ongoing impacts will need to continue to be evaluated for their efficacy and their continuing value, because they can be quite expensive and drive a lot of costs. I think it's important that we continue to examine all those things over time, and the Sex Offender Management Board will play an integral role in examining those issues as we go forward. And it's also important to note that Jessica's law allows local jurisdictions to impose tighter standards, which many jurisdictions are, and those standards oftentimes are reviewed by the Sex Offender Management Board as well.
Also to add on, I think one of the greatest aspects of the Sex Offender Management Board is that it's there for everyone, not just for the administration to go to ask questions, but the local governments can go to it to ask questions and to ask them to look into issues. The legislature can go to the board to ask questions, have them look into issues. So from that standpoint, it's good to have a centralized and a very diverse board, by the way. The 17 members of the board are from all various areas within not only local law enforcement, but local government, treatment, and other areas related to sex offenders. So from that standpoint, it's a very useful tool for the state.
Any public testimony on this item? The chair's recommendation would be to approve as budgeted. Member Cook, any?
I'll second that.
Very well. There's a motion and second. We'll take a roll call vote and then leave it open.
Arambla?
Aye.
Chesbro? Cook?
Aye.
De La Torre? Jeffries?
Very well. We'll
Pass.
keep that open. We'll move to issue number 2 then, mental health staffing ratios. And finance or corrections, which of the two?
Michael Meow, Department of Finance. This proposal requests $10 million in the budget year and $77 million over 5 years. This would implement a new staffing ratios for the mental health program. This model would replace the previous staffing analysis model that was developed by a contractor. We would note that the previous model was never fully funded or fully implemented due to many flaws that were found in the study. I'll let the department speak to the concerns with the study.
Hi, I'm Sharon Ongstein with CDCR Healthcare, and I want to provide a little bit of background. I know there's some really difficult decisions that have to be made given the budget deficit, and CDCR has been no different with that, and we've certainly submitted through our dental program some significant cuts that you just, through the consent agenda, approved. And so for the mental health part of this, it's been much more problematic. We've been in litigation now for about 15 years. And the staffing model
With
was
the Department of Justice representing you?
Absolutely. The monitoring costs alone are about $4 million a year, and that does not include what we spend on the Deputy Attorney General or in-house counsel. It's quite expensive proposition. So we're working very hard to try to remove ourselves from that. And there are two key pieces to doing that, is really around a bed and space plan, which we have been pursuing, that's also been before the legislature, as well as our staffing plan. Once you get those two in place, then you can actually get the rest of the pieces and parts and move on. So we, a few years ago, the legislature did grant funding to develop a new staffing model. This was developed through a contractor, and they submitted that to the department with a number of issues that needed to be resolved. Those were not resolved over the 2-year period before I arrived. I've been here a little bit over a year now. Once I came, I discovered that we were moving forward in the spring finance letters, and I was told by the special master, "What are you doing about your staffing?" I said, "What staffing?" This was a couple months into the job. Then we learned where we were with the staffing analysis model, which was fraught with many problems. And so over the next 3 months, we attempted to fix the model. As of July, pending a court order from June that said that we had to have a model developed by August 31st, we made the decision around the 1st of July that we needed to abandon the staffing analysis model and develop a new model. And part of the reason that we went to this newer model, there are abundant problems with the staffing analysis model in terms of one big Excel spreadsheet that was based on any number of assumptions that were not proper or not really correct. And it was very complex, and it was very difficult for the Department of Finance to replicate it. We couldn't replicate it. I felt that there was absolutely no way I could defend it to this body or anyone else for that matter. So in Ohio, I was in Ohio. I've been in several states, but in Ohio, in the corrections system, I took over when we were sued, and we developed a staffing model that was very similar to this one in how we went about it in terms of using ratios that carried us through our entire consent decree to resolution of our case 5 years later. And so I knew that this system worked and that it would carry us through. Very uncomplicated. Anyone can figure it out. We have been able to get the plaintiffs on board with it, special master, and everyone, including finance and all, have been in agreement that we use the right kinds of criteria in order to develop it. And so we are moving forward with wanting to get the staffing up so that we can resolve our cases.
LAO, would you provide us your analysis and also on the your views on the SAM, the model that was just described?
Sure. Aaron Edwards, Legislative Analyst's Office. At this time, we are recommending that the legislature reject this proposal. In our view, the department has not made a strong enough case for converting to a new staffing model, particularly at a time when mental health costs for in-prison treatment have been growing significantly. It is true that the special master, which oversees the litigation in the Coleman case, did raise several issues with the assumptions underlying the current staffing analysis model. However, in his letter in June 2008, he also recommended that the department make some adjustments to that model, and he found it to be modifiable and adjustable, and recommended that the department make those adjustments and then move forward with that staffing model. And that is the main reason why we don't feel that the department has made a strong enough case at this point. And we would also note that the legislature did approve, as part of the 2007-8 budget, the 2008-9 budget, about 400 positions that were justified based on the staffing analysis model that's currently in place. And as recently as an April finance letter in 2009-10, positions, an additional $8 million was granted for positions based on that staffing analysis model, too.
A couple of questions. To the Department of Corrections, what happened? I know it may have occurred prior to your watch, but why was it that no one at CDCR was providing some kind of oversight to the study that was going on to determine if the product was usable or not? How come we didn't catch it sooner?
I really can't speak to what they were doing previous. What I do know is that because it was a pretty complex process, many of the problems were not revealed until much later after the model was developed. And given the complexity of it, I think there were clearly people, providing oversight to the process. But when you get into those kind of complex things, that's, I believe, how things can go wrong, and that's part of why I like the model we have now, because it's very easy to understand. Anybody can look at it and figure out what we did, and it's sustainable.
Mr. Chair, Dave Lewis, Deputy Director of Fiscal Services. I think part of the problem with the existing model, the SAM, if you will, is that it is so complex that it would be very difficult for any person to actually provide any level of oversight because it's so difficult to understand all the underlying assumptions. And it's so, I mean, there's something like 10,000 separate links involved in this process that required 4 people just to maintain the Excel spreadsheets that came with the model. And those people were just there to kind of maintain the process, and I don't think even they had a true understanding of exactly what was the results of it. So I think that part of the problem is that we allowed a contractor to provide something that was not easily understandable to the layperson or even to some of our experts in the department. And until you start to examine some of those underlying assumptions, which, as Ms. Ongst pointed out, happened after the fact, we were unable. We should have probably have found some of these flaws earlier, I think, but we did not. But that doesn't. There's no excuse for us to go forward with a flawed model that we know that won't meet the court's needs, and will continue the litigation for this foreseeable future.
Let's assume for the moment that. That it is a flawed model. Department of Finance, has there been any kind of an independent verification of what corrections are saying, or are you accepting their assumptions and their conclusions, including the higher cost?
Well, we concur with their concerns with the model. The tool that the contractors gave us to adjust the staffing ratios in the population process was never really used because we couldn't figure out exactly how to use it. We used the general staffing ratios that they gave us, but the tool was just so complex that it could never be duplicated. So we shared the same concerns as the department.
Have you done an independent verification of the findings of the department that it is unusable? Has anyone else looked at it other than the department?
Of Finance. The current proposal out there actually goes through and compares what we have versus what some other states are doing, like Ms. Ongstead, the state of Ohio. We looked at other states like that. As far as the SAM model, we didn't go back and compare it to what other states are doing because, as we indicated, it's more of a mathematical formula, and it's not something that we could go through and look at and take position by position or area by area and compare to other states because it's this overly complex mathematical model that just kind of spits out a number. Here's what you get. Put in some inmate numbers and boom, there's your answer. Our current model, you can actually go through and do that type of analysis. Here's what we have, what we're proposing in our state and what other states are proposing for that similar type of mental health care.
Mr. Chair, also, the department is working closely with the Office of State Audits and Evaluations to review our medical costs, both for medical and mental health care, and compare them to other states to provide some assurance that we are providing similar levels of care to those other states that may have been successful in getting out of their litigation.
I do need to comment, having done this in Ohio, the complexity of our case in terms of the requirements for mental health are far greater than I've seen in many states. So that does require a different type of staffing than you might have in other states. Had we been able to do this 15 years ago, I think it might have looked a little different. But 150 court orders later, and having lost the case, then they dictate what we do. And in order to get that job done, there are things that we have to staff it up.
I think and I want to give you the benefit of the doubt, but I'm also mindful that we spent $750,000 on a study that was, according to your testimony, not usable. Are any consultants being brought in to take an independent look at this? or do we again just take it on faith that this is the best approach?
Well, from my perspective, the way that we started this process was to bring everyone in from day one, and that included Department of Finance to set up the criteria that they needed this thing to look like. We also had Department of Mental Health involved. We had also the special master has members of his team, one of which was involved in Ohio, who works in any number of states on various consent decrees. So has extensive experience in those kinds of systems that are constitutional. So he was the kind of co-leader, I guess, from the special master side on this. So what we did was talk with other states. We actually did talk to other states as well as getting their numbers to find out how they did services. We did not go out and pay someone else. I didn't feel like, since $750,000 was down the drain, I really didn't want to decide to go out and get other consultants, particularly because I have enough national connections and people that I was able to talk to that I thought I could get the information that I needed.
Now, let's say, and I will allow you to jump in just after I finish this train of thought. Let's say the previous model had flaws, and you're suggesting some very significant flaws. Was there anything of value in it that might justify continuing to use it in some capacity?
Yes, absolutely. One piece of that we have found very useful is the piece that looked at how you delineate between different levels of custody and how to assign staff based on that. So we're using that in terms of how we distribute staff throughout the system, because as you're looking at level 1 institutions versus level 4 institutions, you have different kinds of security issues, physical plant issues, and other issues that this study did identify and that we'll use in developing the rationale or the method by which we put staff out into the institutions.
Okay. Member Cook?
Thank you very much. Sometimes I have these ideas and I forget about them by the time maybe that's why I was so eager, but some of the conversations we had in the past, the big variable was the professionals, if you will, not being physically close to many of the locations. In other words, recruiting somebody to drive to Blythe or the middle of the desert, they can be very well qualified, but from the pool that's in the area there, it's almost impossible, even when you arrive at the model, to get them at a particular location. And I just hope that in the future, when we do this, if this is a constant variable, and that is that the philosophy of locating prisons or correctional facilities a long ways away from their support systems, you're almost making it impossible to comply with any recommendation you come up with. And I know we've talked about this in the past, and I just hope we don't lose that variable that is very, very important for future planning and construction and location of correctional facilities, because we're going to be playing that game.
Well, and if I can comment, one of the really, I think, important parts of the new bed plan that we developed that is substantially less expensive than the first one that the receiver started with, will allow for us to locate inmates at hubs. So that what we're able to do is, in those areas that we cannot recruit staff, we're trying to move more inmates with medical needs that include also mental health needs, so that we can recruit the staff. And when we developed the most recent bed plan, that was one of our key criteria: is how do we put the inmates closest to where we can find the staff to staff those. So I think your point's very well taken, and I think we've incorporated that well into the new bed plan.
Okay.
A follow-up question for the department and for LAO. The LAO, I believe, referenced in their analysis that there may be some salary savings. Please walk us through what is available, and if the savings are not there, what happened to the savings? And would then ask LAO for your assessment of this issue.
Unfortunately, we provided the LAO an inaccurate spreadsheet that really did indicate that there was about $100 million in salary savings in 2008-9 related to mental health positions. That spreadsheet had a couple of significant formula errors in 2 particular months, in July and August of that year. And if you fix those 2 errors, and in addition, if you take into account the fact that all state positions, with the exception of some of our posted positions, have a 5% salary savings rate applied to them, so they're only really 95% funded, you get down to about $50 million in salary savings related to mental health positions in 2008-9. As far as how that money is spent, it's largely spent on registries, which tend to be slightly more expensive than filling those state positions. But those are how you secure some short-term resources when you can't secure them through hiring someone through the normal state process. About $46 million related to that. In addition, there was about $10 million that was given to the receiver to cover their needs to provide nursing coverage for a suicide watch, and then another about $10 million related to overtime for the existing positions that did exist. We did overexpend the mental health budget by approximately $19 million overall in 2008-9, and it largely related to those factors.
Alejo?
We did just receive recently some updated information from the department related to salary savings. We're in the process of reviewing that right now, and we'll be happy to follow up with your staff once we conduct a full analysis of that.
A related question is the issue of vacancies. What is the status of the mental health position vacancies? And it's related to why we continue to use more expensive staffing registries so much.
Yeah, actually, I think we have done a pretty remarkable job in terms of reducing our vacancy rate. I think where the problem comes in is people tend to look at the vacancy rate without registry, and then they believe we have a lot of vacancies, when in fact we don't, because we are using registry to back it up. For psychologists, our rate as of January of this year, and that's after a year of no recruitment, we canceled all of our recruitment activities last year because of budget cuts. Despite that, our vacancy rate without registry was around 10%. With registry filling behind that, it was 2%. So it's very, very low. For psychiatrists, it was 29%, and with registry, it brought it down to 11%. And I ought to note as well, some of the registry that we do use are not temporary. They end up being more longer term because they may be in those areas that are hard to recruit. And then for social workers, without registry, it's 11%, and with registry, it's 8%.
Would it be less expensive to have in-house staffing as opposed to the registries?
We prefer to have civil service because it is slightly less expensive, and that's the direction that the state has wanted to go, is to have civil servants versus contractors.
In that light, is CDCR working with other agencies to try to channel some discretionary workforce investment funding to these categories of positions?
I don't know what that is.
For example, mental health nursing or technician positions might be filled, or you might develop a cadre of folks that could move into those positions using some of the workforce investment funding.
Well, I think we are, in concert with the receiver, working closely, for example, with San Joaquin County to try and recruit psych techs and nurses for the new mental health and healthcare facility that would exist in Stockton. I think that we have worked closely in the past with some of those agencies in order for recruitment, but maybe we can work a little more closely as we go forward, and we'll look into those.
I'd like to ask if you can provide us a summary of your activities in that regard, because this subcommittee also has jurisdiction over some of the discretionary workforce investment funds. And if we see that it's costing more to use the registries, and we might help meet that need on a permanent basis, maybe we can make some adjustments in terms of where we choose to put those discretionary funds.
We would welcome that. Thank you.
what is getting in the way of filling those positions? Are we having trouble recruiting? Is it that people don't have the necessary skill sets? How are we going to staff the beds that we're authorizing, and how will you ramp up so that the use of registry staff will diminish over time?
Well, first of all, I think we hope that there will be some population reductions, and second of all, that a lot of these inmates are going to be moved from where they currently are housed, which are in bad beds, to the better beds. So depending on the number of inmates you have, you put a new facility up, it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be adding more money to that if you move the inmates. So there's certainly that aspect. Then in terms of filling positions, I think with psychology and social work and those kinds of positions, I think we do pretty well. It's easier to recruit them full-time, but I know from experience in many states, psychiatrists have a tendency not to work in any one place full-time. They have a tendency to like to do a day here, a day there. They work at the university, they may teach, work in a hospital. So it's very hard to recruit them full-time as civil servants. But we've done a pretty good job of that, given that we only have a 30% vacancy of civil service for psychiatry. We also are looking at using nurse practitioners in lieu of psychiatrists. And so we're looking at a number of possibilities to expand the workforce of who we can recruit in. In terms of, for instance, social workers, we're looking at marriage and family therapists. So we're looking at a number of expansions, and a lot of people have a lot of concerns with those things. The psychologists have a problem with the marriage and family therapists. The psychiatrists have a problem with nurse practitioners. So no one's happy. But from my perspective, as a person who's an administrator and needs to get this job done, I want to open it up to as many people as we can to be able to make this work. So we've got a number of those efforts.
Well, in light of the discussion and the lack of opportunity for the LAO to review some of the financial figures, we'll keep this item open and then revisit it in the future.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll turn to issue 3, the Coleman short-term and intermediate custody issue. And if you would present again on the need for the proposal.
Sure, Mr. Chair. This is a proposal for $6.7 million and 73 positions related to our short-term bed plan for Coleman for custody needs related to that. We're activating a number of short-term beds, awaiting the long-term solutions related to the long-term bed plan to address some of the deficiencies for mental health staffing and mental health beds that Ms. Ongst referred to earlier as part of the approach that needs to be done. This custody staff is important in order to provide access to care, escorting, and other duties related to those short-term beds.
And LAO, I understand that you're awaiting an update of the implementation plans before you can give us your analysis?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. At this time, we're waiting for an updated implementation schedule so that we can assess whether or not this proposal will actually require all of the resources that have been requested to implement.
To the department, what is the status of your activation plans? I understand that you may be a little behind schedule for the short and intermediate term mental health facilities. When will we have the information that will help us make a decision on this proposal?
We were just finishing getting the final piece from DMH today, and my understanding is they should have it by this evening, and we'll get that over to them right away.
Oh, excellent.
We had tried for yesterday, but couldn't make it happen.
And to the department again, the LAO pointed out there may be some staffing offsets associated with moving mental health inmates into different housing units. Can you comment on that?
There's certainly some offsets when you create these appropriate levels of housing for these inmates. There will be some deactivations that will occur as part of the normal POP process in the May revision in what we would call the institution activation schedule. However, it should be noted that a lot of these beds are crisis beds or acute care beds that are short-term in duration and really don't result in taking down other beds because they're only there for a short time until they're stabilized and are able to return to their long-term housing options.
Well, we'll hold this open then pending review of the implementation plans and the material contained therein. We'll go to issue 4, the Correctional Treatment Center at San Quentin and associated staffing. Take it away.
There was a finance letter last year to activate the Correctional Treatment Center at San Quentin. This staffing, at that time it was assumed that because the receiver was activating most of the building, that they would provide the licensure staff needed for these particular license beds. As the receiver is not running that entire building as licensed space, they don't need some of the licensed staff that we will need running this licensed facility. So we're asking for $762,012 positions to provide the licensure staff needed to maintain this as a licensed space for these mental health beds.
Is it conceivable that some of the positions being requested might not be mandated or could be redirected from other responsibilities?
I think there's approximately 3 positions that are not mandated by the actual codes related. Those are related to scheduling efforts that are needed to maintain the smooth operation of the facility and some other needs like that. In addition, redirecting positions probably is not really feasible in this situation. San Quentin is an extremely old facility with a deteriorating physical plant that really doesn't present opportunities for redirection of maintenance staff and those types of staff, which are largely what's included here, just due to the condition of the overall facility.
LAO, do you need any additional information, or do you have an analysis for us today?
At this point, we would just note that Title 22 does require these activities be completed to maintain the facility. However, it doesn't mandate that these positions need to be tied to the specific facility. So I guess there are some positions, for example, pharmacists that could potentially be redirected. We're not sure from an operational standpoint whether or not that's possible, and we would just like to see, I think, from the department a little bit more information related to that.
Okay. Well, it seems like a legitimate proposal, but we'll provide some additional time for you to consult with the department. So we'll hold this one open also. On the next issue, issue 5, I understand the administration is to present a revised proposal. If that is the case, we will hold it open after asking some questions to hopefully air out some of the concerns.
The department is proposing to reduce the Division of Juvenile Justice by approximately $48 million, growing to about $65 million in future years, and 574 positions related to reducing DJJ's population primarily through 3 strategies. The first being the limiting the age of jurisdiction to age 21 for juvenile offenders, transferring eligible wards, or actually felon commitments, to adult prison. There's a certain population that were committed as adults but are still housed in DJJ after the age of 18. We would still continue to commit all under age 18 adult commitments to DJJ to maintain the appropriate sight and sound separation, and then also to limit or eliminate the use of time ads. The administration is no longer proposing to limit the age of jurisdiction for all offenders to age 21 due to the nature of the crimes committed by a number of these juvenile offenders and the fact that they would suddenly be released with no parole services and really released to the community. We feel that would be detrimental to public safety. And we would also note that the population at DJJ has declined pretty significantly since this proposal was made, primarily because of policy changes related to the use of time ads and time credits for our juvenile wards. Chief Deputy Secretary Warner is here to answer any specific questions you may have regarding these proposals.
Let me ask if the LAO has any comments on this item.
Yes, the handout that we just passed out details some of the options the legislature has to meet the $48 million in savings that the original proposal put forth by the administration would generate. As they acknowledge, the change in the proposal will reduce the level of savings, and so we would be happy to, if you would like us to go through the different options that the legislature has to achieve savings.
If you would, please, yes.
Okay. If you turn to page 3, you'll see that there's 3 general strategies to reduce DJF ward and parolee populations. The first is reducing admissions. For each juvenile not sent to DJF, the state saves the cost to house that individual and supervise the offender on parole.
And that annual cost is upwards of $200,000?
That's correct. It's around $225,000 in the budget. In addition, the legislature could reduce length of stay. The legislature could also reduce parole caseloads and returns to DJF, and we note that there are significant savings possible depending on the options that the legislature chose to pursue and their interactive effects. Savings could range from the tens of millions of dollars annually to the hundreds of millions. If you turn to the next page in your handout, you'll see there are various ways that the legislature could reduce admissions to DJF. The legislature could limit the wards who are eligible for DJF. We note that the eligibility for DJF has already been restricted, but the legislature could restrict DJF only for wards who have certain programmatic needs like mental health needs. In addition, the legislature could shift full fiscal and programmatic responsibility for juvenile offenders to the counties, as we've recommended in the past. If you turn to the next page in your handout, you'll see several different options for reducing the amount of times wards serve at DJF facilities. To begin with, as the governor has proposed, the legislature could reduce the age of jurisdiction that youth are eligible for DJF for. In addition, another option the legislature has would be to release wards early from DJF. These wards could be identified, for example, with a validated risk assessment. A third option that the legislature has is to expand the availability of credits to reduce ward sentences. In addition, as proposed by the governor, the legislature could require DJF to transfer certain wards who are eligible to adult prison when they turn 18. And finally, the legislature could also limit or eliminate the use of time ads as the administration has proposed. If you turn to the last page in your handout, you'll see that there are several different options for reducing parole caseloads and returns to DJF. To begin with, as we've recommended in the past, the legislature could shift responsibility for individuals released from DJF to the counties. In addition, the legislature could eliminate parole for certain wards because under current law, all wards are required to go on parole if they're under the age of jurisdiction. In addition, the legislature could discharge certain parolees early. Unless wards have reached their age of jurisdiction, only the Juvenile Parole Board can elect to discharge wards early currently. However, the legislature could limit parole length of stay to no more than a year. And finally, the legislature could also make certain parole violations ineligible for revocation, which would also reduce parole.
Similar to what we did with the adult population last year.
That's correct.
Has the department given consideration to these options, or will it be doing so in the process of revising its proposal?
I would say, Mr. Chairman, Bernie Warner, Chief Deputy Secretary of Juvenile Justice, that in many of these cases the department has been implementing them. Just for some context, California has the lowest commitment rate of any juvenile justice system in the country. I think the counties do a great job for 99.6 of all juveniles that come into the system, but there are those 300 to 400 a year that, because of their offense and because of their treatment needs, come to the state. So through the course of changes in SB 81, we have narrowed those who are eligible to come to the state system. We have, as Mr. Lewis said, implemented policies that enhanced incentives for youth to earn time credits, and we have narrowed the amount of time ads that youth receive. So that is a result of our population that was anticipated to be over 1,600, now being just a little over 1,400. I would say the youth who are in the state system now, given their risk and treatment needs, would be very difficult to serve them at a county level.
Member Cook, any questions on this item? My inclination is to recommend that we hold it open and to allow the administration to revise its proposal. Comfortable with that?
Just my, the only reaction I had about shifting responsibilities to the counties, I can already hear the scream down there right now. So
We'd have to shift money. I suspect though,
that's what. There's the rub.
Mr. Chair, one more
Yes.
thing I would add in terms of trying to be cost effective is that there have been two things that DJJ has implemented. One is to really be efficient in the number of living units we operate. So 3 years ago, we had 100 living units statewide. We are now operating 52 as a result of the reduced population. So that's resulted in the closure of the facility in Paso Robles, facility in DeWitt, and the Stockton complex. And 3 weeks ago, we closed the youth training center in Chino that was the largest DJJ facility. And so there has been a movement toward efficiencies. We've also implemented a staffing model that we've done in conjunction with the experts in the federal litigation of what are the minimum staffing requirements to be consistent with our litigation. And that has, again, resulted in a reduction in staff in DJJ. So there are efforts underway to be as efficient and effective as possible.
Can you provide the committee with a timeline for when the proposal might be revised and presented back to us? Department?
Andrew Sharper, Department of Finance. What we need to do is wait until we finish the population process and may revise, because those savings and the new population numbers will weigh heavily on the new policies that we can put in place, the time ads and the transferring of the Superior Court cases. So I would expect mid-May to come forward with a revised proposal.
Very well, and I'll trust you'll keep the LAO informed and,
of course,
provide an opportunity to do a full analysis. All right, thank you. We'll move to issue number 6, then the last for today's hearing, and this deals with the State Criminal Alien Assistance Program. Oh, I'm sorry, public testimony. I'm sorry. Yes, that would be fine.
Mr. Chair and members, Elizabeth Howard Espinosa on behalf of the California State Association of Counties. You perhaps did hear me scream from the back of the room. We are very sensitive to the local impacts. We've said this before, the criminal justice system, adult and youth alike, is a closed system. The changes and discussions that are made here certainly affect the manner in which we do our business at the local level. We have very strong policy that supports a continued role for the state in the provision of services for both the treatment, supervision, and custody needs for these kids. There is a very limited population that remains with the state. In our view, that is appropriate, and we would have some difficulty. Certainly always happy to talk, but I think we would have a lot of things that would need to be worked through should a realignment be discussed. We're very interested in seeing the administration's new proposal on the change of age jurisdiction, and once we see the details, we can give you a better sense of what the local impacts would be. Thank you.
We look forward to it.
Craig Brown for the California Correctional Peace Officers Association. We had serious concerns about the administration's proposal. We think any proposal that substantively reworks the juvenile justice system any more than it's already been reworked and comes out in the May revision is simply too late to give it a fair debate. What we're talking about is dramatically affecting young people's lives, people who, for instance, under their original proposal, and I don't know if it's gone away or not, would have been tried as juveniles, kept in the juvenile system, had a chance, will now probably be tried as adult, sent away 25 to life. That deserves a policy committee consideration. We think the May revision proposal is far too late to give it the public debate that it needs, especially when it's going to save a small amount of money. We would rather invite that you look at overhead in this department. Yes, they've closed living units. I'll give you an example. They have 160 staff in the parole division and about 1,800 parolees. Most of the staff are not serving parolees. They're serving as overhead. We'd invite you to take a good hard look at overhead over the next little bit of time.
I will request the LAO to take a look at that issue. But given the population adjustments and the administration's request to revise its proposal, I don't think we have an option but to wait until we receive it.
Juliana Vorse with the Urban Counties Caucus. We also have concerns with the LEO's proposal to potentially shift more of the juvenile population to the counties. We just don't think we have the facilities to treat the type of juvenile offenders that are at the state facilities, and we would certainly be open to looking at the revised proposal, but as CSAC said, we need that to see that to provide any input. Thank you.
In your experience, have counties been closing or reducing their facilities?
Not to my knowledge. I don't know if Elizabeth Howard has anything more to add, but not to my knowledge from the Urbans.
Okay, thank you.
Steve Calver on behalf of the Board of Supervisors, Los Angeles County. Our county would have some concerns about a transfer of DJJ wards to the county. Under SB 81, we're already taking approximately half of the 707Bs that come out of the system. So I think we're doing our best to work with the state on this issue.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair and members, Corey Salzillo on behalf of the California District Attorneys Association. Realizing that the proposal to limit the jurisdiction has been put over for reworking, would just put into the record that as Mr. Brown said, this is a policy change that needs to be discussed in the policy committee process. If this is a change, it doesn't produce savings for at least 2 to 4 years. And we need to remember that this is a dispositional tool for district attorneys and prosecutors who, if a jurisdiction of DJJ was limited to age 21, might not see a short-term commitment as a good dispositional option.
It might affect how district attorneys prosecute some juvenile crimes. Is that what you're suggesting?
It could. If there are, if one of your options on the table is a 2 or 3 year commitment to DJJ, and there's someone who commits a very serious crime, then that's something to think about. If the only thing on the table is an adult commitment or a short-term juvenile commitment.
Given some crimes might be prosecuted juveniles as an adult as opposed to a juvenile.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Helen Roth Dowden, SEIU Local 1000. We continue to work with DJJ on some of their proposals. We do have concerns because with juveniles it's a lot more complicated when you start changing these age ratios because of other federal requirements on mental health issues with individual education plans that are done, the IEPs on these, which go up to age 22. So those kinds of things have to be taken into consideration, but we continue to work internally with DJJ on these issues as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. Danielle Higgs on behalf of the Chief Probation Officers of California. We'd like to echo some of the comments made earlier by CSAC and others on this proposal. We certainly appreciate the administration's commitment to taking another look at the DJJ and age limit proposal. CPOC certainly recognizes the role that DJJ plays in the continuum of public safety services and the criminal justice system. And so, you know, after SB 81 and some of the shifts that were made there, there's little room and resources at the county level to deal with the further shifts, as CSAC had mentioned. So we appreciate revisiting this proposal and look forward to working with you going forward. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Seeing no additional testimony, any final comments? No? Very well. We'll move to the following issue, issue number 6, the State Criminal Alien Assistance Program. And first, I would ask, what's been the federal government's response to our request to fully fund the incarceration costs of undocumented prisoners?
Keith Geminder with Finance. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not aware of any formal response yet. I know that the administration is mounting a full court press in Washington to try to get both the SCAP funds and funds in other program areas where it believes that the state deserves more money from the federal government. In the case of SCAP, the costs that CDCR incurs are directly related to the federal government's failure to adequately patrol the borders. And the administration, given the dire fiscal circumstances that we're in, was not willing to once again assume in the budget that we would receive 10 cents on the dollar for our costs.
Any indication of when we might have some information that we can use during our budget process?
Unfortunately, we won't have the final word about what ends up in the federal budget until after the state's fiscal year begins. One encouraging sign is that for the past several years, the president's budget has included $0 for SCAP, and then later the amount would be raised to the low amount that we've been getting. This year, the president's budget includes $330 million for nationwide. It's at least a better starting place than zero.
Okay. A couple of questions. In last year's May revise, the administration proposed to save $182 million through the commutation of sentences for undocumented inmates who would then be deported, presumably, to their countries of origin. How many names did CDCR forward to the governor as undocumented inmates eligible for release when we adopted the estimate of $182 million savings?
We've been working with the governor's office to develop a process related to the commutation of ICE inmates. I'm not sure exactly how many names have been submitted to the governor's office at this point. We'll be happy to get back to you on that.
If you would, we would request on behalf of the committee that information in writing. And if you could also provide how many the governor did act upon once those names were submitted.
I'm not sure that we can provide that information. At this point, we haven't commuted any sentences and haven't sent no one back early, and I can't comment on the governor's deliberative process.
Right. No, I understand the deliberative process, but just what did Joe Friday say? Just the facts. If it's zero, it's zero.
At this point, it's zero.
Okay. Under the current proposal, has CDCR forwarded to the governor any names in order to save the $19 million?
Have we forwarded some names for commutation?
Yes, there was a previous proposal for representing $182 million. That's been apparently revised to $19 million. Has the governor acted on any individuals under this revision?
It would be the same proposal and the same answer.
Okay. LAO, you're the benefit of your counsel.
Thanks. Paul Golizewski with the Legislative Analyst's Office. Regarding the SCAP funding that you were asking about, we would note that last year Congress appropriated $330 million, and it was estimated that the state would receive about $96 million of that total appropriation. And as the Department of Finance noted, there's $330 million in the president's budget currently. Yet the administration is estimating $970 million. So we think that this assumption of federal funds is fairly unrealistic. And in the past, we've always projected SCAP funds in the future based on what we've received in the prior year, since we don't know until after the end of the state's fiscal year. Regarding the commutations, we would just note that in the department's fall population budget request, they estimated about $4 million in savings in the current year from commutations, and at this point, given that it's already mid-March, we would estimate that savings in the current year would more likely be zero.
Well, I would be reluctant to use unrealistic assumptions because they have a habit of bleeding over into the next fiscal year. So to the extent we can, let's get figures that we are comfortable with and confident that they are likely to happen so that we don't just kick that can down the road. I'd rather deal with, as difficult and painful as it may be, I'd rather deal with it this year and have an honest budget going forward so that we know what we can expect. Member Jeffries, any comments on this item? Very well. Then we will hold this item open also. And I think that has concluded the business before the committee. There are some votes. I'd like to call the committee secretary, and the sergeant, I believe, is calling absent members. So Member Jeffries, if you'd like, we'll read the items that require a vote and allow you to cast your vote if you wish. Mr. Secretary.
It's a CDCR issue number 1, Sex Offender Management Board, and the Sex Offender Risk Assessment Tool.
And the vote was so far?
Vote so far is ayes 2, no 0.
And I believe that was Member Cook and myself who voted for that. And very well. Jeffries is an aye on that item. Other items?
Nope, that's it.
Very well. Then with that, we will adjourn this meeting. We'll keep the roll open for 10 minutes while absent members come and cast their votes. Thank you all very much for being here today.